Hi, I'm Michael Makovsky, President and CEO of JINSA. Welcome to another episode of Snapshot. I'm here, as usual, my colleague, John Hannah, the Charles and Randi Wax Distinguished Fellow here at JINSA, Senior Fellow, excuse me. John, you're Distinguished Senior, but we're only calling you Senior. So let's talk today. It's Friday, September 5th in the afternoon. Let's just talk just a few minutes about what's going on with the UN week coming up, where you have all these leaders coming into New York for the General Assembly. There's discussion that, that Macron, the French president, is talking about when he's in America, New York, he's going to, at the UN, he's going to recognize a Palestinian state. The Israelis are furious about this. The United States has been rather dismissive. You had Rubio saying, Secretary of State and Security Advisor Rubio, saying that I think the day, if I'm not mistaken, he said the day that Macron made this announcement, the Hamas started ratcheting up their demands, it put the hostages in Gaza at risk. I remember when Trump, I believe Trump was asked about this. I can't remember, a little while ago when I think he was one of these leadership meetings. I think it was the one in Canada, but I couldn't remember. He said, when they asked somebody, he says, well, no one really listens to him, Macron, anyway. But the Israelis are trying, there's been reports of them trying to push back in different ways, like maybe they'll annex parts of the West Bank. They're also, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was just in the paper the other day that they've invited Bibi, the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, to France, but he doesn't want to go unless the French drop this. I think that was Gideon Saar, the foreign minister, talked about it. But anyway, I'd like you, there's another angle in all this, as this is going on, is the Gulf Arabs. What's their view? What are they thinking about all this? Especially about the reports of annexation that the Israelis might annex part of the West Bank in retaliation. So why don't you pick it up from there, John, and kind of enlighten us on that part there?
Thank you, Mike. First, a couple of other context points. I mean, the French obviously led this effort on the recognizing the Palestinian state, but we've had a bit of a snowball. Shortly thereafter, we had the Brits weigh in that they were going to take some action. The Canadians, the Australians. Just this past week, we had the Belgians saying that they may take action as well. And of course, getting to the Gulf Arabs. The original French idea for doing this was unveiled at a special conference, international conference convened on a Palestinian state, the two-state solution that the Saudis and MBS were major backers of. They were the co-chairs and participants. They've been advancing this idea for a long time of going ahead and recognizing a Palestinian state. I presume because they feel under enormous pressure from what is appearing 24/7, thanks to Al Jazeera and other Arabic language TV stations on their screens that upset their people a lot. And they saw this as an easy way to suggest they're really taking action here. Of course, it goes completely against not only Israeli policy, but American policy on the need for anything to happen has to be as a result of a bilateral negotiation between Israelis and Palestinians. Nothing can be imposed.
John, sorry, one thing I'll just add. I forgot to say that Rubio even said this, which is what the Israelis say. It rewards Hamas terrorism. Sorry.
Yeah, no question that I think as a substantive matter, it's hard to see how this advances anything about peace between Israel and Palestinians, and on the contrary, probably reinforces and re-energizes the more radical extremist Islamist Hamas view of that they're actually winning through their violence. This is what October 7th has achieved, something the illegitimate Palestinian Authority and feckless Palestinian Authority never could accomplish. this is the fruits of October 7th. So all kinds of reasons it's bad. The one step the U.S. did take to really try and push back was that they've allegedly denied a lot of senior Palestinian officials, including the PA president, Mahmoud Abbas, from being able to come to New York and the UN General Assembly to celebrate whatever is going to happen there and participate in whatever gets done there. But I guess the really more important news from my perspective that's a little bit more worrisome is it came out of left field a little bit. A senior Emirati diplomat, a woman, Lana Nusseibeh, who was their representative in New York, United Nations, very well respected. I would say, together with Yusuf Ateba, their longtime ambassador here in the United States, she's probably the most highly regarded and significant Emirati diplomat on the scene, who has very close relations with the ruling family in Abu Dhabi. And I have no doubt she gave an interview to the Times of Israel this week. Quite extraordinary interview. It's not usual that Emirati diplomats do this, where she chose an Israeli publication to send a very strong message across Israel's bow, and probably the US's as well, saying that if Israel were to go forward with this idea of annexing parts of the West Bank, it would essentially close down the process of regional integration that's been going on since the Abraham Accords 5 years ago. So whether or not the Emiratis themselves would take action to kind of close down their own relationship with Israel that started in 2020, they left it unclear. I know the reporter, he said he pressed them on that. Are they saying the Emiratis would do something in the U.S.-Israel bilateral context? And she went out of her way to leave that open, not answer it definitively. So this is worrisome. I'm not sure when the Israelis proposed this, and you're probably better at explaining what the Israelis or people like Ron Dermer think they were doing by introducing this idea of possible annexation as a response to what the French were doing. But now we've got this additional factor in play now that the Arabs, and particularly the country closest to Israel, the Emiratis, are suggesting there could be consequences on their end in terms of Israel's broader relationship with the Emirates, with the Gulf, and certainly with regard to Saudi Arabia and the hope for normalization on that front.
Yeah. By the way, I think that's it. I'll just add, and I think people suspect one of the reasons Macron is doing this is because of his significant Muslim population in France and his popularity. Yeah, in all these countries, and he's also particularly unpopular, I think, in France, and his poll numbers are low. I remember a time. I know from my study of history that you'd have the Europeans accuse the United States of being biased towards Israel for domestic political reasons, which the U.S. would resent, I think. And now it seems like the Europeans are pursuing policies that are not constructive at all, that are actually counterproductive, reward terror, and aren't going to go anywhere. But it's,
right, they just create real new problems. And I don't know what it's like exactly in Canada and Australia, but both in France and Great Britain, these are left-leaning governments, significant Muslim populations, Belgium too, of course. But in France and Britain, if you look who's surging in the polls, it's right-wing parties and politicians who really have taken very strong, aggressive stands with regard to immigration, with regard to Islamism and the threat of Islam in their countries. They're the ones who are surging. So this may even be bad politics in their own countries, but they seem incapable of not going down this rabbit hole that, as you said, is not going to have a real impact positively on the conflict itself, and if anything, will probably set us back in any effort to get to some more stable and peaceful situation.
And number of these countries also have surging anti-Semitism, and that these governments are not doing enough to combat. We spoke before, or I'm not sure if we did. You had this about the U.S. Ambassador Kushner, the father of Jared Kushner, was the U.S. Ambassador of France, accusing him of writing a piece in the Wall Street Journal directed at Macron, saying you're not protecting Jews, you're not combating anti-Semitism. Obviously, we see this in the UK. Unfortunately, we've seen it on our border in Canada with these left-wing governments, and it's a sad situation. But during UN week, let's revisit this issue and see.
Mike, let me just, before, I know you want to close it out, but just a little more context. Remember, 5 years ago, it was Yusuf Otaiba, the Emirati ambassador here in Washington, wrote a front page op-ed in Yediot Ochronot, telling the Israeli people in Hebrew that they kind of faced a choice between prospective annexation of parts of the West Bank, which was kind of in the air before the Abraham Accords, or they could have normalization with the Emirates, and therefore annexation got postponed. And this interview by this senior Emirati diplomat certainly had echoes of that. It sounds like the Emiratis are trying to do that. I think Ron Dermott, it was a smart move to introduce annexation, that, telling these governments, these Western European governments that are playing a very destructive role, that, if you go and do this, we can impose real prices that you don't want to, that one thing you don't want to see happen, that will have real consequences in the region. So it seemed to me, at least at a bargaining, negotiating level, to try and get them back off made some sense. But now the Emiratis have come in from a different angle and introduced a certain complexity and complication here that we're just going to have to see how it plays out, both in Israel and internationally, especially when we get the UN in a couple of weeks here.
Of course, I wonder if the assumption is if Israel could do certain things in countering them, that suggests these governments really care about the Palestinians, which I personally am very skeptical of. We'll see. But you would think that they wouldn't want Israel to annex. They've actually made that abundantly clear that they don't. And but as you pointed out, John, how the Gulf Arabs have been dealing with all this hasn't really gotten the attention, and this interview really kind of puts things back, brings a lot more focus on the Emiratis.
It's the first time I can remember in the length of this 2-year war in Gaza that's been pretty brutal, and at least the pictures on TV for these Arab audiences, I can imagine these governments are under some pressure. But this is really the first time the Emiratis have suggested there could be, even in terms of their own bilateral relationship, a price to be paid here for Israel. And Israel may not care too much about what's happening in French high politics, but they value that relationship with the Emiratis, and I think vice versa. The Emiratis value their strategic relationship with Israel, especially what Israel did to the Iranians just a couple of months ago. So it's all very complex, and maybe a lot of activity in public and no intention to do things behind the scenes. But hopefully, the Israelis and Emiratis are talking to each other in a very serious way and working something out.
Great. Well, look, John, thank you very much for addressing this issue that hasn't, I think, gotten a lot of attention this week, but is important. So let's revisit this in a few weeks during UN week in New York, and see how all this plays out. I want to wish you, John, a good weekend, and wish everybody a good weekend. And thank you very much for joining us today. Bye.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye. Thank you.